You guys can go ahead and mute your microphones for a couple moments. I'll take some questions a little bit later. Let's go ahead and mute our sound. Jesse. All right, somebody. There we go. Okay, there we go. All right, so I want to do three things today. I want to first talk about, very briefly, when you're looking at a research study, what are some of the things that you're looking for? What are some of the things that you're going to find in a study? Then we're going to talk about being specific with your research questions. I was addressing a lot of questions during office hours the other day about making your questions specific enough. And then the last thing that we'll do today is I'm going to show you a quick little IWA checklist just to make sure that you're hitting on all the points within the rubric. So those are the sort of three things that we'll do today. Then we'll finish up. I'll take questions from anybody, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this up. All right, so let me share with you a quick little graphic that I found the other day. When you're looking at a research article, so this is going to be something like in the stimulus packet, this is going to be something like that really long one about the gene splicing. When you're looking at one of those articles, okay, that's typically longer. Typically, it's a little denser. It's more scientific. It's going to contain a lot more jargon in it. Okay, it's kind of helpful to realize that they're typically broken down into six different parts, excuse me. Okay, and I'll post this graphic later for you too. But typically you would start with an introduction, and the introduction's going to contain three parts. Now, when you're looking at a research article like this, you may not read the entire article in full, but it's usually very helpful to read the introduction because that's going to give you an idea of whether or not this is going to contain information that may possibly be useful to you later on. So you're especially going to want to look at the background. Most of them are going to have what's called a literature review in them, which is basically where they're going to briefly describe and go through what research has already been done. Now, that might be important to you. That might be important to you because the literature review is going to give you an idea of where else you can look for information. Okay, I know a lot of you have asked questions of me at various times and basically essentially said, where can I go to find more information? One of the places that you can go is looking in these studies, looking at the literature that they've already reviewed, okay, looking at what's already been done. And so the literature review is going to be a good place for you to look, as are the sources at the bottom, but we'll get to those a little bit later. Okay. Then there's something called the gap, which is going to explain why this research is important. Okay. At that point, if you have read this far into the study, and based on the background and the significance, it doesn't seem like it ties into your topic, there's no reason for you to keep on reading the rest of the study. Okay, you should only continue if what you can tell, from what you can tell thus far, is going to be relevant. If it's not relevant, don't waste your time. So don't move on to these other sections. Go and find another study. But if you do believe at this point that it is going to be relevant, then you move on to the next section, which is going to be the method. This is where the researcher is going to explain how they did what they did and why they did it that way. So for example, they might say that for their research study, they used a sample size of 50 men and 50 women between the ages of 20 and 40, okay? So that is their explanation. They are telling me how they conducted the study and that they mailed surveys, whatever, okay, or they did interviews. The justification would be where they explain why they did it that way. Why did they choose a sample size of 100 people? Why did they choose people between the ages of 20 and 40? Why did they word the questions the way that they did? Okay, so that's the justification. This is the how they did it and then the why they did it. This is their methodology. It's how they use the science, how they use the research. Okay, after that, you're going to get results. Most of the time, the results are going to be in the form of either a graph or a table. It could be an image, it could be a pie chart, but this part is just going to be results. There's not going to be any kind of commentary. There's not going to be any sort of discussion of the results. It's just going to simply be some kind of a graph or a chart where you can look at it and you can draw your own conclusions from it. The results are not really going to include any kind of a bias or any discussion of a bias. Okay, it's just going to simply be what the results are. It's the next section, section 4, where you would then look at how to interpret results. Okay, this is going to be the author's, essentially the author's opinion at this point in time. But keep in mind that their opinion is informed by the data. Okay, so this is going to be where they're going to tell me why these results are important. Okay, how does it connect back to my original question from up here at the beginning? Okay, and then perhaps most importantly, what the limitations were of this research. So for example, if they were surveying 100 people between the ages of 20 and 40, one of the limitations might be that they didn't get a perspective from children, or they didn't get a perspective from senior citizens or something like that. Those are going to be limitations, okay? Those of you who were doing surveys, I don't remember if there was anybody that were doing surveys for this IWA, but if you were, okay, a limitation right now might be that because we're all under quarantine, right, it's going to be very hard for you to collect data, okay? So you might just, you might talk about in this section of your writing, if you were doing a survey, okay, or if you were collecting data, this would be the part where you would say that because of a pandemic, you were not able to go out and conduct a survey, or you were not able to conduct interviews, or whatever, okay? So that's where you would describe any of the limitations to your research. Now, implications is the next section, okay? And the implications basically are you explaining to us what this might mean, okay? So if you collected all this data and you're interpreting this data, what does it mean? Okay, does it mean that males show a clear preference towards variable A, whereas females showed a clear preference towards variable B? Okay, or maybe it's not a gender implication. Maybe it's that people over the age of 30 tended to lean towards variable A. People under the age of 30 tended to lean towards variable B. Okay, but the implications basically are where you tell us what this might mean. It's not definitive at this point, because the whole purpose of research like this is that other people are going to take a look at your data and might potentially draw their own conclusions, okay? And then you come to your conclusions, okay? This is where, again, you're going to talk about how your data reflects back to your original goal, and then what are the impacts to whatever it was that you were studying. So in your conclusion, you might address, like in the example that we looked at Tuesday, where the person was studying night shift workers, okay? Maybe they found that the people are less alert that work at night. And so impacts to the field might be that employers have to schedule additional breaks for those that are working at night. That would be an impact on the field. Maybe the people that work during the day only need a break every 6 hours, but because some people that are working at night, okay, because the body tends to be less alert, maybe an impact might be that the night shift workers need a break every 2 hours or something like that. That would be an impact to the field, okay, so how things might change. Then the bibliography would be the last part. Now, what you call this is going to depend on what formatting you are using. Presumably, all of you are using APA, so your bibliography is going to be called the references. That's what you would title that final page. Not the works cited, not the bibliography. If you're using APA format, you are going to call it the references page, okay? Or simply put references. And we'll go over formatting Again, as we get closer to the final due date for this paper, I'll do a lesson again where I talk about putting in the running heads and how to cite your sources and do all of that. So we'll get back to all of that later on. Okay. All right. So I thought this was just a handy little graphic that might help you kind of make sense of a longer research article. Like I know that one in the stimulus packet about the gene splicing, that was a very scientific, was, you know, kind of a very heavy article. And so I think if you look at it in chunks like this, it might help you a bit. All right, the next thing I want to show you, let me turn that off. The next thing I want to show you is an idea or some examples of how you can make your research questions a little bit more specific. So these were from last year's questions. This is from a teacher at another school, so none of these questions are anybody that you would know, okay? Oh no, this is from this year, excuse me. This is from this year, but it's from a different school. A lot of you were having trouble, and I know this because I answered a lot of questions about it. A lot of you were struggling with making your research questions specific enough, okay? And so a lot of you are asking these kind of more vague questions that, you know, sort of required a more detailed research question. So if you look at this first one here, how far can happiness go before you are no longer in touch with reality? I understand what that person is saying there, what they're trying to do, but realize that the question as it's worded originally here, this is going to be way too broad, okay, for a research question. And so in this example, this person had to revise and had to make the question more specific. And so what they did is they changed that to what extent can happiness go before leading to a dissociation from reality or leading to mental illness. So now they are getting more specific about what it means to be no longer in touch with your reality, and they're specifying here mental illness or a dissociation from reality, which I found out is a diagnosed psychological illness. Okay. Now, then the other thing that you have to do, okay, and that you should think about once you have a research question, because a lot of you were also struggling with how do you tie it into something from the stimulus packet. So once you come up with a research question, you should ask yourself, okay, how can I connect this question specifically to something from the stimulus packet? And this particular student said that though it was difficult to connect to anything while I was analyzing the story of an hour, I realized the connection fell amongst getting so lost in your happiness that at the return to reality through the truth, one falls apart. For example, as the news settles in Miss Mallard's mind, she finds herself lost in a false reality, suffering and dying from a heart attack as the truth pulls her down from the height of her happiness. This is how this student would explicitly connect to the question to their research, okay? And so this is what you need to be asking yourself. You know, you don't have to write this out if you don't want to. I'm not going to force you to do that, but you should be able to explicitly connect your question to one of the stimulus sources, okay? So let's look at another example. How can a sense of community affect how happy you are? And so how we connect it is, this person said, in the happiness documentary, it discusses how living in communal housing can improve their happiness by not having to cook or clean, and they're able to rely on each other for whatever they need. Again, an explicit connection, okay? Or here's another one. Can the constant stimulation of the reward pathway lead to long-term reduction in total dopamine diminishment? This is extremely scientific. Unless you've taken psychology or have a background in this particular area, I would avoid something that is this scientific, okay? Because you don't want to get caught up in this sort of lumping of data when it comes to something that's that specific. So I would be careful with a question like this, okay? But the way that they connected it is they actually connected it to have you renounce pleasure, where it talks about the more pleasure that we experience, the more bored and less happy that we become. So that one is kind of interesting because it takes a very scientific question, but it actually connects it to one of the less scientific sources from the packet, okay? That's Have You Renounced Pleasure, if you don't remember, is the interview with the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop, okay? So it's a less formal source, but it connects to a very specific scientific question. All right, let's look at just a couple more. To what extent is happiness sustainable, and how do your genes affect sustainability? Okay, so this one used the study Genes, Economics, and Happiness, and it talks about a person's capacity for happiness, showing their sustainability of happiness and how different people with different genes have different sustainability in terms of their happiness. This is a pretty obvious, I think, pretty clear connection. All right, one more, and I forgot to blur this person's name out. So this is Megan. I guess it doesn't matter because you have no idea who that is. So she asked, to what extent do genetics affect someone's ability to live a happy life, okay, or a very happy life? Okay, and again, she uses Genes, Economics, and Happiness, where she says it describes how certain people with a more varied efficient genotype of the serotonin transporter gene often live more satisfied lives. So again, an explicit connection to one of the materials from the stimulus packet. And so this is something that you should be able to do, okay? And so at some point, if I were to ask you formally or informally, or next week as an assignment, I said, explain to me how your research question relates to something from the stimulus materials, hint, hint. If I were to do that, you should be able to explain to me how your question relates specifically to one of the materials from the stimulus packet, okay? And it should be something that you should be able to do very, very quickly. If this is something that you have to think about, or this is something that you have to research, that means one of two things. Either your research question is not specific enough, or you haven't studied the stimulus material well enough, okay? Because this should be something that should take you like 60 seconds to do. If you've written a research question and you've gone through the stimulus material and you know how you're going to connect it to one of the stimulus materials, then this should be something that is extremely easy for you to do. Okay, it shouldn't be something that you have to think about. So if this is a question that you can't answer, or this is an exercise that would be troublesome for you, okay, over the next week, you need to think about how you can more closely relate your research question to something out of the stimulus material, okay? And so I'm gonna stop right here before we look at the last thing. And if anybody has any questions about that specifically, and wants to ask it, you can go ahead, unmute your mic now. If you want to ask any specific questions about what I just spoke about, now would be the time to do so. Okay, anybody? No? Okay, all right, then we'll move on to the last thing, and then I'll take any general questions at the end. So this last thing that I'm going to share with you, again, this is something that if we were in school, I would have you fill out to turn in. But since we aren't at school, this is going to be something that you can just use for reference, and you can use it to help you. What I did for this is I went through the rubric and I broke down each of the points on that rubric, okay, into specific questions. Okay, and so these are questions that you should go through for yourself with your draft, and you should ask yourself if you did these things specifically, okay? So did you, for example, if you look at the first one, did you develop a research question that made it clear that you engaged in the 2020 stimulus materials and allowed the documents to inspire authentic curiosity, okay? If you answer no to that, then you need to go back into the stimulus materials, okay? And you need to think about a better topic, okay? Did I discover themes that were clearly rooted in at least two of the text from the stimulus documents, which included some of the large overarching theme of, I think happiness is a better way to phrase that, of happiness, okay, whoops. So that would be another question. These are both based off of the first part of the rubric, which is evaluating your choice of topic, by the way. That's how I developed those two questions. The second category on the rubric is how did you use the stimulus materials, okay? So for this one, did you choose an area of inquiry that was thematically rooted in two or more of the documents from the packet? Did you integrate details from the materials in the packet, being explicit about the relevance of the material? This goes back to what I was just talking about in that previous document, okay? Again, if you're doing this well, you should be answering yes to these questions. If you're answering no, then you know that you need to go back and you need to look at that area again. Okay, so more questions for the use of the stimulus materials. Did I contextualize the document to accurately represent its source? Did I position evidence, and I spelled that wrong. Did I position evidence from a document in conversation with the evidence from other sources that you found on your own? Okay, so these four questions, again, are all about the use of the stimulus materials. Then we come down here. I'm not going to read every single one of these to you, okay, but here we have the third area from that rubric, which is development of the area of inquiry and your research question, okay, and you can see this is about choosing specific details, making a clear research question and or a thesis, okay, so this is all about specificity. This one here, I think, is where a lot of students tend to lose points because they don't consider multiple perspectives, okay? So if you're going to go through this document, this is a block, or this is a category that I would pay special attention to, which is evaluating multiple perspectives, okay? Are you getting into the complexity of the issue? Are you elaborating on the different perspectives, okay? Did you figure out what the difference is between a lens and a perspective? Okay, a lens would be something like legal or environmental or economic, whereas a perspective would be your point of view, okay, which might be that happiness is an illusion. That's a perspective, that's not a lens, okay? Did I explore alternate views by engaging with their evidence and their reasoning? So are you considering, again, additional evidence beyond that, okay? And so I think this is definitely an area where people tend to lose points, okay, because they become very, very pigeonholed on their line of research, and they aren't looking at alternate points of view or different perspectives or multiple lines of reasonings. Okay, speaking of lines of reasoning, okay, do you clearly demonstrate the evidence, or rather, do you clearly demonstrate a link between the evidence and the claim? Do you have a clearly articulated position, i.e. a thesis? Okay, that's what they're talking about there. And is your thesis easily identifiable? Okay, are you using your own voice? Okay, this is important here. You know, as much as we should be guided by the research, okay, we need to keep in mind that there should still be a lot of your own voice driving this, okay? Your whole paper should not be 85% quotes, okay? By all means, use a quote when it's appropriate and when it's important, okay? You know, if it's saying something that there's no way for you to say it your own way, then by all means, use a quote. But the majority of your paper should not be quotes, okay? So please keep that in mind as well, okay? And then we talk about the use of evidence down here, okay? So rather than just presenting evidence, are you explaining the evidence? Does your evidence come from a lot of different sources, including a peer-reviewed journal, as well as academic sources? Remember that you can also use non-academic sources, and you should have a mix of both. Do you provide commentary to explain the evidence and the relevance of it, and if it is or isn't credible? Okay, you should be doing that as well. Okay, And then does the evidence that you choose fully support the claim? Again, a lot of students will pick evidence and I'll read it and I'll be like, that really doesn't say what you think it says. So do make sure that the evidence that you're presenting or the evidence that you're using, do make sure that it is relevant to the claim. Okay, and then we get into making sure that you're citing everything correctly. Okay, using, again, we want to use APA format. And then the last one is making sure that your grammar and your mechanics and all of that is going to be correct, okay? So this is something that you can do on your own, okay? You don't have to turn this in. It is optional. I'm gonna post it later this afternoon during office hours. But this is a document I think that will help you, okay? And you should be answering yes to most of these questions. If you're answering no, right now it's okay, but it means that those are the things that you need to go revise before your final draft is due at the end of the month. So at this point, I wouldn't expect you to be answering yes to every single question, okay? But it should give you kind of a roadmap for the things that you're answering no to. You know what you have to go back and fix, okay? So for your no answers, this is a good way for you to say, okay, I answered no to 2 of the questions about multiple perspectives. So when I revise my paper, I know that I need to go back and I need to do a better job considering multiple perspectives, okay? All right, and so right now I'm gonna go ahead and stop and I will take any and all questions at this point.
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, Tanis.
Okay, so damn it, you were talking and I forgot it. Wait. Wait.
Okay.
Bruh.
I'll remember it. Ask somebody else a question.
You always do this, Tanis.
I know.
You do. And yes, Tanis, I am going to put this onto Teams. I just saw your question in the chat. Okay. So yes, I will put this up on Teams.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, when you said, so if we put something in our thing at the end, right, the APA reference thing at the end of our paper.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't quote it, like, can we put it there?
Yes.
Like, wait. So when you say to use our own words, do we have to cite that or like reference that it came from somewhere?
If
or
you
like
use it in your research, yes. Okay, and so you may not be quoting it, but you might be using information that you got from that source, and that's where at the end of the sentence or that paragraph you would put the parenthetical citation with the parentheses and the author's last name, and then the year and the page number from that source. So yes, okay, that's and that would be where you are using information, but you're using your own voice, okay? Because you are taking information that they've included and you're either putting it into your own words, okay? Or you are using that evidence, but not directly quoting it, okay? David, you have your hand raised. Go ahead. Unmute your mic.
Okay, so when you say to not explicitly, when you say to connect your question to the stimulus materials, or do you explicitly say that in the essay?
You may or you may not, okay? You probably will need to, it's very obvious to the reader how your question or your topic connects to the stimulus material. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to have a sentence that's going to say, my question connects to the stimulus material by, okay? You're gonna have to do it a little bit more academically than that, but it should be very obvious to the reader how it connects to the stimulus material. Okay, what I can do this afternoon, I will post an example from a paper from last year that scored very, very high, where you can see how they did this well. Okay, so I can give you some kind of an example of that. Other
then can you use first person
You should not use the first person, no. Okay, so you should not say I or me at any point in time. No, not at all. Definitely not. Okay. Other questions? No other questions?
So for the peer reviews, that's due on Sunday, right? Sunday night?
Due on Sunday, yeah.
It just has to be like 2 random people?
Yep. You know, obviously don't peer review your own. And like, if you go into someone's paper and you see that like 3 people have already done it, maybe try to choose another one that fewer people have done. Okay, so that way you can help out your classmates. So like, if you go in to do it and you see that this person's already gotten 3 this week, you can try to find someone else's paper that doesn't have as many. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Any other questions? All right, then. All right, everybody. It was very good to see you today. I'll be around for my office hours starting. Yes? No? Okay. I'll be around for my office hours starting at about 1 o'clock, so you can ask me any questions that you have then. I will upload all of these documents onto Teams so that you can have access to them if you want to use them. Otherwise, hope you all have a good day. Hope you're all doing well, staying safe. I miss you all. I will see you all soon. And we'll go ahead and we'll hang up now. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.